Alright, so before I get started, I would like to say that guidelines for care may change a bit or a lot depending on the species, but I do highly recommend Reptiles for care guides and other information about these animals that is up to date. I also want to mention that some of these animals may be illegal to keep in your area depending on where you live, so just make sure to do plenty of research beforehand. Alright, let's get started. Number 5 on my list of best pet beginner snakes will be a corn snake. Corn snakes are one of the most popular snakes in the hobby, and for a good reason. With many different morphs and even scaleless corn snakes available, this animal has been put at the top of many people's lists when talking about the best pet snakes. Handleability. There's no doubt that these snakes are awesome. I mean, I have 4 of them, but in my experience, they aren't the most handleable snakes. Depending on the individual, they can be pretty squirmy, and the one I'm holding right now is kind of an exception. Obviously, she is pretty awesome to handle. I do want to mention that I've talked with other corn snake owners who have had a completely different experience, but like I said, this might all depend on the individual. My first snake that I got was this particular corn snake, and even though I'm not 100% sure on the morph, this one is definitely more handleable than my albino corn snakes, for example. Corn snakes do eat very well for the most part. Only one of my corn snakes, this one, will refuse food occasionally, but never for more than 3 weeks or so. I feed my adult corn snakes an appropriately sized frozen thawed mouse around every 2 weeks and young snakes around once a week. I will say that my corn snakes rarely try to bite me during feeding or any other time, unlike some of my other snakes. Now when it comes to activity levels, my 2 albino type corn snakes both hide a lot and I rarely see them. These are also the snakes that are less handleable, and I kind of think those 2 things go together. Now I'm not sure if this is just coincidence or if they don't like being out in the light because of their lack of pigmentation, but either way, this is one reason why I didn't put them on the top of the list. These snakes may also change as the snakes get older. I mostly will catch my corn snakes active during the nighttime hours right after it gets dark. Size. Corn snakes get around 3 to 5 feet long as adults. Now this one, like I said, is kind of a weird one. I'm not sure on the morph. So this one's definitely not going to get 3 to 5 feet long. This snake right here is probably 4 to 5 years old now. Whenever I got her, she was 2 to 3 years old and she has barely grown at all. So I'm not sure if this snake was stunted or if maybe she's some kind of a hybrid or possibly even another species. Some people have mentioned that she kind of looks like a Gulf hammock rat snake, so I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. Number 4 on my list of top 5 beginner pet snakes is a Florida Kingsnake. The Lampripeltis genus is probably my first or second favorite group of snakes. There are several super cool species and morphs of king snakes that are available, but this is the one that I've had the best experience with. Handleability. This is my Mosaic Florida king snake. This snake is one of my most handleable snakes by far, and I have never had any issues with thinking this one might get away while holding it. I mentioned this in a previous video, but the day I got this snake, I thought something may have actually been wrong with her because of how slow she moved around, but that never changed and this snake is super healthy, so I've learned that that's just how she is. Feeding. This snake has never refused a meal. Like with my corn snakes and other colubrids, I feed her a frozen thawed mouse around once every week, but I will switch her to every 2 weeks as an adult. My Florida King is a bit aggressive towards food and will shake her tail a little bit, but almost never tries to bite me. She has tried to strike a few times, but has never actually really bit me. Now, my Florida King snake isn't the most active snake that I have, but I do often see her coming out during the evening hours, sometimes even before dark, unlike my corn snakes, which sometimes only come out when it's completely dark. During the day, she is mostly hidden and definitely doesn't enjoy being dug up, like most other snakes, if not all other snakes. They don't enjoy that. Now, size. Florida king snakes get around 3 to 4 feet long as adults, so a 40-gallon or equivalent enclosure may be a good starting point as they get older, but depending on the individual, they may need something larger in the future. Now, number 3 on my list of top 5 best beginner snakes is the common garter snake, also known as the red-sided garter snake. Garter snakes are one of the most common snakes in the world. There are many different awesome looking species of garter snakes, but these are some of my favorite. And just to throw out a quick disclaimer, I wouldn't recommend cohabbing almost any snake other than a garter snake, and even then you want to be super careful and keep an eye on them. King snakes, for example, will definitely eat other snakes if the opportunity arises. But garter snakes do seem to benefit from being around each other. They seem more confident and calm with others around. Handleability. Garter snakes are far from the most handleable snakes that you can get. These are super active snakes and pretty much just always want to get away. Unlike some other snake species, such as my Florida Kingsnake, which doesn't really get into a hurry to do anything. After consistently handling these snakes, they may get a little bit more used to it and calm down a little bit, but they'll still probably be pretty squirmy. Feeding my garter snakes is one of my favorite things to do. They don't just eat rodents, they may also accept tilapia or earthworms. I personally like to switch from feeding my garters mice one week and then worms or tilapia dusted in multivitamin powder the next week. Now, I avoid feeding my garters any other type of fish other than tilapia, since other types of fish may contain thiaminase, which can be harmful to them. Hopefully I said that wrong. Thiaminase. I'll pop the word up so you know how to spell it. Gartersnake.info is a website that you can visit to find lists of which fish do and do not contain thiaminase. Activity levels. Garter snakes are by far the most active snakes that I have and are super fun to watch. In fact, I only have one snake enclosure in my room, and it is the garter snakes enclosure because of how active they are. It's also super fun to see how they sometimes seem to stay together and seemingly mimic each other's actions. Size. Garter snakes can get around 2 to 4 feet long, but usually it's more like 2 to 3 feet, with the males being smaller than the females. I keep 2 males together to avoid breeding and because they're smaller. Number 2 on my list of top 5 best beginner snakes is a plains, also known as a western, hognose snake. The hognose snake has become super popular in the pet trade, and I don't see why it wouldn't. Look at how cute these snakes are. With their shovel noses and interesting personalities, there's no doubt that the hognose snake is one of the coolest pet snakes. When it comes to handleability, my hognose snake has always been very handleable. Maybe not quite as handleable as my Florida Kingsnake or my Pueblan MilkSnake, but still a fairly slow-moving animal in my experience. My hognose snake has never tried to bite me and has never shown any kind of defensive displays like you may see in other individuals. I mostly take this as a positive sign that the snake is comfortable in its environment, though other factors may be involved. Now, when it comes to feeding, when I bought this particular snake, it was on live rodents, and I was successful in immediately getting it switched over to frozen thawed. This snake did refuse a meal once or twice in its first few months with me, but it hasn't skipped a meal in several months since then. Activity levels. This snake is probably my second most active snake species behind only the garter snakes, which makes this snake really fun to watch. Almost every morning when I get up for work, I can find my hognose snake curled up under her UVB and heat lamps basking, and oftentimes I find her exploring her enclosure throughout the day. Now, it comes to size. Plains hognose snakes generally will grow to around 2 to 3 feet as adults, making them one of the smaller pet snakes that are available. Keeping certain species like this one may be more ideal for someone who has limited space compared to keeping a corn snake or a ball python, which can get quite bigger. Alright, so number 1 on my list of top 5 best beginner snakes is the Pueblan MilkSnake. The Pueblan MilkSnake is my number 1 best beginner snake for several reasons. This snake has a good combination of handleability, feeding, activity levels, and size that made me decide to place it at the number 1 spot on my top 5 list of best beginner snakes. Let's talk about handleability. My Pueblan MilkSnake is the most handleable snake I have outside of ball pythons, and I'd say it's close or equal to the handleability of my Florida Kingsnake. Now, this animal does move around a bit, but just seems more curious more than anything, compared to some of my other pet snakes, such as my albino corn snakes and garter snakes that just seem to want to get away and hide and just really aren't interested in anything else. When it comes to feeding, this specific snake is one of the few snakes I have that has never missed a meal after having it for around 2 years now. This snake is a great eater and has never been very defensive while eating like my Florida King Snake or Mexican Black King Snake. He just eats his meal and moves on. Super easy. Activity levels. Many times I do find my Pueblan MilkSnake out and about and exploring his enclosure. Not only during the daytime, but also sometimes at night as well. I definitely see this snake more often than most of my other pet snakes. Usually, at least in my experience, snakes that are super active inside their enclosure aren't always the best to handle outside of their enclosure because they are super active and are just trying to get away. My Pueblan MilkSnake doesn't move around too fast, but doesn't spend a lot of time hiding either, so it's a good balance to have as a reptile keeper. When it comes to size, Pueblan MilkSnakes get to around 3 feet long as adults, which means you won't have to buy a giant enclosure for this animal, though I would recommend keeping them in at least a 40-gallon enclosure or equivalent as an adult. It may be larger if they grow longer than that particular enclosure's length. So that's it. Obviously, this is limited to only 5 species, but there are so many snakes out there that would make great beginner snakes. These are just animals that I have personal experience with. Just make sure to do a ton of research beforehand and be 100% sure you can give the animal proper care for the many years that it may live. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. So I will talk about a couple of honorable mentions. One obviously should be ball pythons. The only reason why these aren't on my list is because they can be quite boring, in my opinion. And sometimes they can go on hunger strikes for quite a long time, which can be super stressful, especially for beginners. They are awesome snakes, don't get me wrong, and they have awesome morphs and are super handleable, but they are far from being the most active and easy to feed snakes. Ball pythons do get out and about, but not nearly as often as other snakes. Now, my second honorable mention that I will talk about is a Kenyan sand boa, which is another snake that you will rarely see since it spends most of its time hiding. My Kenyan sand boa also has refused to eat from time to time and can be picky about how its food is offered, though this has gotten better with time. Kenyan sand boas are super beautiful animals though, and I'm glad that I do have one. They have such a unique look and can be super fun to watch bury into their substrate.